Imagine a world where countries didn't exist. No borders. No flags. No national anthems. Hard to picture, right? But it's not that long ago that human societies didn't think of themselves as nations at all. Instead, people lived in tribes, kingdoms, and empires, with loyalty to a ruler, not a country. Here's a shocker. Nationalism, the idea that people should belong to a specific nation, only really took hold in the last few hundred years. In fact, 200 years ago, many of today's nations didn't even exist. The modern idea of a nation-state is a pretty recent invention, and it has completely reshaped the world we live in. So, how did we go from living in scattered tribes to lining up behind flags and borders? In this video, we'll break down the surprising origins of nationalism. We'll uncover how ancient myths, kings, and revolutions played a massive role in shaping the way we think about countries today. Buckle up, because the story behind nationalism isn't what you might think. Chapter 1: The Seeds of Unity. Before nations, there were tribes. Before nations existed, humans lived in smaller groups, tribes, clans, and villages. These early communities had their own identity and ways of life, but they weren't nations as we think of them today. The concept of nationhood didn't exist, but humans instinctively created bonds. This bond came from shared survival, stories, and beliefs. According to historians, early societies valued these connections because they provided safety and order. The tribe was the first national unit, defined by mutual support and shared customs. Even in ancient times, these groups helped shape early forms of nationalism. People could trace their sense of identity back to these groups. While there were no formal borders, members of a tribe had loyalty and common interests. For example, the ancient Greeks, who were separated by geography, still considered themselves Hellenes, or part of the same family. Their shared language, religion, and mythologies were as binding as any national allegiance. Interestingly, the idea of nationhood slowly evolved from these tribal identities. They weren't based on geographical boundaries but on shared culture and purpose. These early nations were flexible, and their ideas could shift with the times. For many centuries, humans were divided, yet connected in a much smaller, localized sense. Chapter 2: The Power of Myth. How stories shaped the nation. Nations didn't just form because of political decisions, they grew from the stories people told. Myths, legends, and historical tales were the glue that held groups together. These stories didn't just entertain, they helped create a shared identity. People connected to each other through a common narrative, whether it was about founding heroes or victorious battles. The Romans are a perfect example. Their founding myth, the story of Romulus and Remus, taught the values of bravery, unity, and loyalty. The myth helped unite the diverse people under Roman rule into one cohesive empire. Even the most far-flung parts of the empire shared a bond through the power of myth. The importance of storytelling didn't stop in the ancient world. In the 19th century, during the rise of nationalism in Europe, writers, poets, and philosophers shaped national identities. The Brothers Grimm, for example, collected and published fairy tales that helped reinforce a common German identity. These tales connected people who had never met but shared a history, even if that history was just a story. Nationalism today still relies on narratives. Just think about the Pledge of Allegiance in the US or the French national anthem, La Marseillaise. Both are powerful examples of how stories and symbols unite people into a collective identity. Chapter 3: Emperors and Empires. How Kings Built Nations. Accidentally, in ancient empires, nationalism wasn't the goal, it was often an accident. Take the Roman Empire. When Rome conquered new lands, it didn't create nations in the modern sense. Instead, it imposed Roman rule over diverse cultures, languages, and peoples. However, this vast empire introduced the idea of Roman citizenship, a concept that would later be central to nationalism. By granting people the rights of Roman citizens, the empire slowly tied together various regions into one political and cultural unit. Fast forward to the rise of European empires like the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans controlled diverse populations across modern-day Turkey, Greece, and beyond. They didn't care about nationalism, they just wanted to maintain control. But by governing so many different peoples, they unintentionally laid the groundwork for nationalism. The idea of a distinct, Turkish, identity, for example, wasn't born until much later, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. In these cases, empires expanded and then fragmented, creating the conditions for modern nations to arise. Empires such as the British Empire, which spanned continents, also helped spread the concept of a unified national identity. Though they didn't intend to, they often merged distinct regions into one, and when the empires fell, these regions sought to form their own nations. If you're enjoying this breakdown of nationalism's origins, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more in-depth explorations of history and politics. Chapter 4: The French Revolution. Nationalism's first big break in 1789, the French Revolution changed the course of history. While it's often remembered for overthrowing the monarchy, it also created a new kind of unity, nationalism. Before this, people were loyal to kings or emperors. But the French Revolution replaced loyalty to a monarch with loyalty to the people and the nation. The French revolutionaries introduced the idea of citizenship, where citizens owed allegiance to the nation instead of a ruler. This shift sparked the creation of modern nationalism, as people began to see themselves as part of something larger than their local communities. The French slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity, liberty, equality, fraternity, became a rallying cry for those seeking unity under the French flag. One of the most important changes was the establishment of the concept of the nation-state. France was no longer just a territory ruled by a king, it became a nation, with citizens united by shared rights and responsibilities. This idea would spread across Europe, leading to the rise of national identities throughout the 19th century. Chapter 5: The Birth of National Borders. How maps changed the world. Before the idea of nations, maps were far less precise. Land wasn't divided into neat, bordered sections like today. But as the concept of nationalism grew, borders began to matter more and more. Cartography became an essential tool for defining where one nation ended and another began. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 is often seen as the start of the modern system of nation-states. This treaty ended the 30 Years' War in Europe and laid the groundwork for the creation of national borders. It marked the shift from medieval kingdoms to sovereign states with defined borders. Over time, these borders became more rigid as nationalism took hold. Maps didn't just define borders, they made them real. In fact, the very act of drawing borders solidified the idea of nationhood. By defining a territory, maps turned abstract ideas of nationality into concrete realities. Today, maps of countries are more than just practical tools, they are symbols of identity. This process also had a darker side. The drawing of borders often ignored cultural and ethnic lines, leading to tensions and conflicts that persist in many parts of the world today. For example, the borders drawn during colonialism often placed rival ethnic groups in the same country, sowing the seeds of future conflicts. Chapter 6: Nationalism in the Modern World. A double-edged sword. Nationalism has evolved in many ways since its birth in the French Revolution. Today, it plays a complex role in global politics. On one hand, nationalism can bring people together. It can inspire pride and unity, making citizens feel like they are part of a collective endeavor. However, nationalism can also be divisive. It can lead to exclusion, where people are treated as outsiders, based on their ethnicity, religion, or national origin. In extreme cases, nationalism has fueled wars and conflicts, from the two world wars to modern-day tensions between nations. Interestingly, surveys show that nationalism is on the rise in many countries. According to a 2019 Pew Research report, people in countries like the US, India, and Brazil have become more nationalistic, with many showing a preference for their own culture and identity over others. However, this surge of nationalism is often coupled with a rejection of globalism and international cooperation. Nationalism, in its current form, is both a tool for unification and a weapon of division. The challenge today is to strike a balance, celebrating national identity without turning it into a source of conflict. As the world becomes more interconnected, understanding the origins and evolution of nationalism becomes crucial for navigating the complex political landscape. If you want to dive deeper into how nationalism is shaping the future, make sure to subscribe for more content that brings history into the present.